Struggles in International Law Under Occupation, convened by myself, Julia Dam, and my colleague Sahiba Makwal, who unfortunately can't join us today, and Caitlin Murphy. Before introducing our speaker, we want to acknowledge that we're joining the seminar from occupied land and that struggles for land justice, for water justice and resource justice continue across this continent. We want to acknowledge the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nations as the rightful owners of the land on which I'm joining the call from, that their land was stolen and their sovereignty was never ceded. We pay our respects to their elders past and present, and also express our solidarity with First Nations people and the peoples of Palestine.
So this online lecture series seeks to foster interdisciplinary and historically inflected discussions about how international law both shapes and is shaped by struggles over natural resources. This semester, we've been focusing on resource struggles in the context of occupation around the world and collectively exploring how struggles over resource plunder and exploitation shape the dynamics of occupation, and how peoples under occupation are contesting extraction and asserting ownership and sovereignty over resources as part of a broader resistance movements. We've been looking at resource struggles in Greenland, West Papua, Palestine, Kashmir, Bougainville, and Western Sahara, to consider the different forms of political contestation that they produce and how resource struggles might be mobilized to enliven political possibilities for self-determination and decolonization. We've been thrilled to have such a wonderful lineup of speakers. So as well as Dr. Hadeel Hussein, who we're hearing from today, you can access recordings of our other seminars on our website. The details of these lectures are in the chat.
I'm now delighted to introduce our speaker for today. Dr. Hadeel Abu Hussein holds a PhD in law from the National University of Ireland in Galway. Her research is exploring the evolution of land law within ethnic states and international law, and how states are constructing land regimes to exercise the exclusion of the minority groups, engaging with the insights of legal geography theory. She's been a Bonavera Fellow with the Oxford Law Faculty, a Senior Research Fellow at the Max Planck Foundation for International Peace and the Rule of Law. And she's the author of The Struggle of Land Under Israeli Law, An Architecture of Exclusion, which was published by Routledge in 2022. Thanks so much for speaking to us today. Hadeel, I'll hand over to you now. She'll speak for about 30 to 40 minutes, and then we'll have some time for questions at the end. Thanks.
Thank you. It's a great pleasure to be with you today. Thanks for all the organization. Thank Caitlin and Sahiba for the invite. I'm so humble and honored to give this lecture today as part of Resources, Struggle and International Law series at Latrobe Law School. Thanks a million. I'm delighted to have this opportunity to share some thoughts with you and looking forward to the discussion afterwards. But allow me before beginning just to feel that I'm compelled to address the situation in Gaza. It's as directly informed not only the subject of our discussion today, but also the urgent realities of international law and the human rights law. Speaking with you today, I do so with very heavy heart, deeply sorrowed in the past 2 years by the genocide unfolding before our eyes. For over 2 years, Gaza has endured unimaginable suffering alongside with 15 years of under siege prior that. With more than half of Gaza population being children, the relentless bombardment over 85,000 tons of explosive has devastated lives, reduced home to rubble, and attacked critical infrastructures such as hospitals, schools, and shelters, including UNRWA facilities. Burning tents exemplifies that severe dehumanization Palestinians continue to endure. However, the resilience of Palestinian people of Gaza during those atrocities has been nothing short of remarkable, inspiring us all to face this unimaginable pain. While recently declared this ceasefire brings a sense of relief and a glimmer of hope, yet it's accompanied by widespread of anxiety and skepticism about whether it will hold. Beyond the cessation of daily bombardment and slaughtering, the scale of destruction has already created conditions that threaten the possibility of life stability and a sustainable future in Gaza. This moment reminds us of the urgent need for the international community to mobilize and meet the legal moral obligation. International legal mechanism must act decisively to prevent atrocities and hold Israel accountable for its action. A ceasefire alone, while necessarily, is far from sufficient to address the destruction and suffering that have become daily realities for people of Gaza. Justice, accountability, and reconstruction, and imperative to ensure not just cessation of genocide, but foundation of dignified and secure future. With these reflections, I turn to the topic for today, what I'm trying to explore the embedded oppression through land law and planning policy against Palestinian under Israeli law. Allow me first just to provide you with a brief historical background to try to explore how their political formation of Arab Palestinian citizens of Israel and their demographic changes that transformed their experience, in particular from majority into minority within their homeland. In the second part of my presentation, I will move to explore the planning issue. In particular, I will give case study example, particularly from the Supreme Court of Israel, dealing with the Sheikh Jarrah case and Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood related to the eviction houses, in linking the series with what my research is doing while discussing the resources and land issues in that regard. As a result of a 1948 and 67 war, massive demographic changes, Jews became majority rather than minority and controlled the majority of territory. From that point onwards, the Palestinians were subject to Israeli rule, has been jurisdictionally divided into 3 areas. According to the partitioned plan, within the Green Line, what's so-called a 1949 armed strike, often referred to as the Green Line. People of those areas become citizens of Israel. They will hold full citizen of Israel. The second consists of those part-occupied territories that have de facto annexed post the 1967 war. Those areas such as East Jerusalem and Golan High. They all fall under the Israeli legal system and its jurisdiction. The third part, Israeli military administration that was initially established and governed to govern Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza, although Israel withdrew from Gaza 2005, but yet we saw what happened recently. So the Palestinian citizens of Israel, what I'm trying to focus on today to try to illustrate the apartheid and the residents of East Jerusalem and as well, gone through historical stages with respect to their political formation and social experience as individual and as collective, starting from 1948, which was followed by military rule period until 1966. This period was critical as imposing the military rule over their disconnected from their Palestinian and Arab nation environment. These stages demographic changes that transformed Palestinians from majority into minority in their homeland. Some 160,000 Arab Palestinians remain in Israel after the 1948 war. They were considered internally displaced in Israel or present absentees. The Israeli government prevented them to return of their majority of Palestinian refugees in the neighborhood Arab countries to Israel, while allowing immigration of hundreds of thousands of Jews from across the world to come to Israel and immediately obtain the Israeli citizenship. The Palestinian Arab lost a great deal on their ownership of land. Jewish before 1948 owned only 7% of the territory before the war, and Palestinian owned 93%. Now that we are more aware of the overview, we are speaking about a population of around 10 million of Israelis. We are speaking about 21% of the Arab population. There are around 2 million within the population of Israel. Hence, the Palestinian citizen of Israel comprise 21% of the entire population that belongs to 3 religions, Muslim, Druze, and the Christian. Majority of Muslims and then Christian and very little minority of Druze. They basically live in north of Israel, which is called Jalil. Smaller numbers lives in the center and in the triangle area where most 17.2 live in the south and they are mostly Bedouin. Beside Arab Palestinian lives in mixed cities such as Jaffa, Haifa, and Yafa. In analysis of the status of the Palestinian Arab citizen in Israel, the political circumstances involved in their creation becoming their involuntarily minority as part of the Palestinian people when we are discussing like West Bank and Gaza and diaspora, they should not be ignored. Examining the Israeli model of citizenship, it is giving us kind of starting point to understand, particularly in an interesting way, their contours of belonging, disposition and equality, discrimination in the context of Palestine. In the context of a Palestinian Arab citizen in Israel, on one hand, security concern combined with the Israeli state calculation caused doubt about the reality question. The state dealt with them as security threat on the other hand for 33 years and until now, today's. On the other hand, the Israeli authorities used emergency regulation against those Palestinian Israeli in Israel, imposed 19 years of military rule that been imposed over major areas where Palestinian citizen Israel lived, from, as mentioned, 1948 till 1966. Why I'm mentioning that specific crucial area? Because those years been transforming it, like most of the land been transformed in Israel from the hands of Palestinian into the state, been during the military rule, used emergency laws, used controlling over land, while most of the Palestinians were farmers in that, imposing the military rule, meaning that they limit their accessibility to land, and then they will confiscate the lands based on present absentee laws because they can't reach their cultivated land. These factors damage their economic and independence of Palestinians, as many of Palestinians were farmers and military rule prevent them from reaching their cultivated lands. In conjunction with one another, these tools facilitated the separation between Palestinian Arab citizens of Israel and Palestinian Arab in neighborhood countries and in West Bank. The systematic land confiscation that started in the period produced permanent outcomes that modify the architecture of exclusion and preventing the Palestinian Arab citizen in Israel from access their territory and land. Even after the termination of the military rule, the situation didn't get better. Palestinian Arab citizens of Israel continue to be excluded from participation fully in socio-economic and decision-making institutions in Israel. It is crucial to remember that given the political reality that reflected the complexity of the challenge that the Palestinian Arab present, the security concern led to the relationship between Israel authorities and the Palestinian Arab citizens in Israel that have caused this marginalization of Palestinian minority in Israel through pursuing exclusionary policies towards them and limiting their access to resources along narrowing their political power. That was consequences for exclusion policies towards them for limiting their access to resources and land that just narrow their political power and domination within the state of Israel because they reduce them to lower socioeconomic community. Just to understand basically what's the foundation of that and why they got the citizenship, we should just read the definition in the Declaration of Independence of 1948, as it declared that the state of Israel, Jewish and democratic state. So it's Jewish states, is a state of Jewish people, that reflection that's automatically excluding one ethnicity, the non-Jewish, the Arab Palestinians. It reflects what envisioned by Balfour Declaration of 1917, as it established the national home for Jewish people, ignoring the Palestinian people who owned the lands before. In addition, various Supreme Court decisions affirm the core principle of Jewish character in the state, such as right of every Jewish to immigrate to Israel will comprise, then they will comprise the majority. Hebrew state will be the central, the official and central language. The state main holidays and symbols reflect the national revival of the Jewish people. The Jewish heritage is the leading component of the religion and culture heritage. Therefore, the establishment of the state were aimed to maintain basically the national Jewish land and strengthen the Jewish heritage, like the biblical request of keeping the land merely Jew, owned by Jews people, and keeping the Jewish heritage. And this is kind of the dominant Zionism ideology was shaping the policies and the planning law in symbolic and else all other symbols in the state of Israel. Yet, why Israel just impose this democratic factor in that? If they just wanted to establish the state of Israel out of their, it wasn't out of their good heart, it as forced by the United Nations Partition Plan in 1947 that stipulated clearly that a nation state must apply substantive democratic regime that provided legal protection for civil and political, social and economic rights. The Declaration of Independence stipulated that Israel will promote development of the country that benefits its all inhabitants as well, that will build on the biases of liberty, justice, and peace. So they propose that they will guarantee like freedom of religion, conscience, language, education, and cultural, but later on, for instance, they downgraded the language, the Arabic language, despite the fact that it was official language. Then they downgraded to have special status, but not official language anymore. So the definition also includes the fundamental aspect that Israel is a democratic state. So it's important to understand that this characteristic kind of conflicting in between, theoretically, what does that mean, Jewish and democratic state? Israel tried to navigate between endorsing nationality and religion as Jewish state. On one hand, and allegedly promoting liberalism and democracy. On the other hand, an audit of the definition of the state of Israel as Jewish and democratic state requires more complex underpinning. Therefore, the tension inherent in the commitment of Israel as Jewish and democratic state. I will argue that ethnicity, race continue to play a primary role in the definition of the concept of the citizens in Israel, citizenship. The conflict is in term Jewish and democratic state. One of various suggestions explaining the conflict is in term itself because it adopts the approach that Israel is democratic national state in which Israel preserve majority ethnic community culture. The justification for a privilege based on historical claims of territory assigned to the restrictive Jewish ethnicity. The term Jewish and democratic state reflects the real nature of the state. And they embedded even in non-bias, non-discriminatory planning and land laws that will be so evident that it's no longer includes all the citizen. More approaches like this consider that not it's Israel merely have formal democracy, only having this free election that capable of changing the government parties. And this is the only essential conditional of classify Israel as democracy. As a result, Israel adopts illiberal processes, practices that discriminatory in its nature, preferring the Jewish majority over others. There is according to another perspective, suggesting that treating the Palestinian Arab citizens of Israel as obtaining their formal citizenship living in this under this ethnic democracy umbrella. I argue that Israel's socio-economic policies have caused internal ethnic and class division among the Palestinian citizens in Israel, limiting their access to resources, and the Jewish have alienated the most people groups, causing distinctive contradiction built in the term Jewish and democratic state. According to the law, the Palestinian citizens of Israel are equal citizens. That implies the democratic condition exists in fundamental definition as a state. Nevertheless, de facto, the Palestinian citizen in Israel struggle with the state definition and the framework of governance of democracy. But the underpinning concept of the superiority of the majority Jewish over others. But citizens may be included or excluded from political decision making, from their accessibility to land, social economic institutions. According to the United Nations Committee of Elimination of Racial Discrimination report, they end over to exclude the Palestinian citizen in Israel from socio-economic and political decision-making institutions. Therefore, they face substantial discrimination, as the report states. I quote, substantial discrimination in terms of economic resources, particularly as regard of housing and land allocation, education, budget, and local authorities, the maintenance of the holy places, the employment as a result of preference given to those who serve in the Israeli military, hence the Jewish. Secondly, they seek better opportunity to express their national identity in culture, to express their national identity in culture, education, and linguistic and other realms. In that context, the discrimination and exclusion brings me to the second part of the lecture, and that related to understand how marginalized of the Palestinian Arab citizen in Israel and related to the land represented in various ways across the civil political landscape. It reflected in socio-economic status of Palestinian Arab citizens of Israel. As a starting point, in Israel, the separation between Palestinian Arab citizens in Israel and Jewish majority, most of the Palestinian Arab citizens live there in their own villages and towns, mostly overcrowded, poorly infrastructure, while some other lives in mixed cities, and even in the mixed cities, they perhaps will live in separate neighborhoods. So, as mentioned earlier, Palestinian Arab citizens of Israel mainly live in northern of Israel, in the villages of small towns of the Jalil area, Triangle, and in the south of Naqab Desert, which mostly Bedouin. 16.6% lived in unrecognized villages. Unrecognized villages meaning that they don't have electricity, they don't have a school, they don't have ownership over their own home or lands. 9/10 of the Palestinian Arab citizens of Israel live separately in Arab communities. 1/10 live in Jewish towns, yet separated communities, neighborhood again in such mixed towns such as Haifa, Jaffa, Lod, Acre, and more. In addition, the education system is separated until the academic level, meaning that integration occurs mostly in the workplace where Jewish typically hold higher position than Palestinian Arab citizens in Israel. One of the main reasons for the situation resulted from the lack of resources available to the Arab community to acquire higher education. Language is one of the boundaries, may also be an additional reason, as Hebrew will be the second language for Arab students. And this is the only university language that you could study in Israel. Most importantly, the poverty reached as high as 60% of the population as an Arab. It's close to like 44 out of those 60, 100% live under the poverty line, and 14 almost there. The legal apartheid is evident that in systematic practices and discrimination against Palestinians, particularly in areas such as citizenship, education, Arabic language, employment, political participation, these forms legal segregation, restricted access to fundamental rights, reinforcing inequality and exclusion at various levels of society. So there's enough evidence to suggest that Israel has passed through the years direct discrimination using emergency law of Palestinian and Israel to indirect discrimination. In particular, in the last decades, had witnessed constant incitement against Palestinian and Israel. 10 of laws targeting their political and social rights, delegitimizing their presence, such as Basic Law, Israel National State of Jewish People. The law simply disregards the existence of the Palestinian and Israel entirely. It maintains Jewish supremacy and exclusivity, establishing Israel in law, not merely in practice, as apartheid state, by de facto and de jure declaring the state to belong only to Jewish people, make Palestinian citizens as second-class citizens, banning them from using state land, privileging Jews in issues of settlement, and downgrade the status of Arabic language to non-official language on top of policy adopted by successive government of increasing settlement growth. What does that mean? We are witnessing an attack of the whole Palestinian question in general, including Palestinian citizens of Israel, Palestinians living in Gaza, Palestinians living in East Jerusalem, Palestinians living in West Bank. There is no sign whatsoever that Israel government intended to change their policy. When the facts change, so must the minds. Systematic racial oppression and deeply discrimination has established single regime which differentiate its distribution of rights and benefit on the basis of national and ethnic identity, and which ensure the supremacy of one group over the Jewish in that case, and marginalize and harm actively the others, the Palestinian, and thus transforming from oppression, occupation, still colonial, and characterized significant to apartheid regime. Turning to land and planning law as to shed the light in some practices to give you a glimpse of how does that in practice work. I will provide as well a direct example of case law from East Jerusalem. But first, it's like one of the examples that explain power law, space, and geography in this broader settler colonial regime. The new Israeli state put emphasis on the laws enabling acquisition and confiscation of vast area, leaving about 93% of the country's land as registered Jewish control property. As a result, the transfer of that land previously held by Arabs to Jewish, by Arab Palestinians to Jewish groups took place while individuals reshaped the future, and the Israeli parliament introduced laws to expropriate refugee territory. This includes, for example, the Absentees Property Law of 1950, the Law on Acquisition of Real Estate, Approved Action and Compensation of 1953. Besides the public law of ownership system, most of the territory is owned by National Israeli Fund, with clause forbidding the future sale of this land to non-Jewish citizens. Goys, like goys in Hebrew mean non-Jewish. There is prohibition in the Jewish National Fund to sell any land to those to goys, like to non-Jews. Notably, 77 years after the establishment of the State of Israel, no one new city or town, Arabic Palestinian town, been established or founded for Arab citizens to adapt their natural growth, despite the natural population growth. Besides the fact no Arab city can be compared with the Jewish one, what does that mean? It's infrastructure, poor infrastructure. Palestinian minority in Israel are suffered from serious housing crisis. We don't have planning, they don't propose any planning scheme even in the Arabic towns. Most of the land available to them to build on is often already overcrowded, with houses and building permits are very limited because the lack of planning in Arab villages and towns. In addition, comparing to conditions in Jewish neighborhoods, the Arab Palestinian neighborhoods, one can reflect the discrimination that exists and demonstrate the limited infrastructure, poor narrow roads, few public services. As a result, the Arab Palestinians are suffering from critical housing crisis. They are not eligible. This is why they can, as a result of this housing crisis, they don't have accessibility to within the planning regime to planning schemes. Then they will build illegally, and then they will demolishing their houses, because it's like where we can look at the problem, because the agenda of the planning laws are just like not to propose any planning schemes to the Arab population, the Palestinian population. So the planning regime and the administration policy has restricted development of the Arab Palestinian villages and towns required within the natural growth of the population. The situation in East Jerusalem is even worse. Currently, only 13% of land is available for Palestinians to build on. Much is already used and overcrowded with full houses and unsafe building structures, because Israel has prohibited those people from renovate the people's house. This kind of one mechanism they are using to force people out of their house, because they won't give them permits to renovate their houses, and then the house will be unsafe for building structure. And this is technically, then this is why they are evicting the houses, not because of their broader ideological perspective of controlling more lands within East Jerusalem. It's also difficult to obtain building or renovation permit with the limited infrastructure for water and electricity. Additionally, the planning regime practices forced eviction and demolishing houses. It's like normal practices, which increase the crisis and violation of basic human rights, housing rights. And those mechanisms used to fulfill the control, expropriation, the lands and houses, and the eviction and house demolishing is just like reach the goal of controlling more Palestinian lands and changing the demographic balance, specifically in East Jerusalem. The situation is challenging as land law in Israel on different occasions used as instrument to control and surface upon which a political struggle has been waged, particularly in East Jerusalem, as they are trying to build facts on the ground with introducing more Jewish within the Palestinian neighborhood. Those examples kind of illustrates what is the real nature of the Zionism project, permit the creation of apartheid regime. Zionism is settler colonial regime that the racism and the discrimination embedded within the system. Definition of the state of Israel as democratic and Jewish state, Jewish and democratic state, is not symbolic gesture, but rather than manifestation of Zionism settler colonial domination over the Palestinian people and illustration of ethno-nationalism. This is the foundation of Israel apartheid regime, as Zionism domination, racial exclusiveness, and necessarily reject the coexistence of Jewish and non-Jewish in the land of Jewish regrouping. Using the settler colonization, addressing these roots of the struggle, broader the Palestinian political imagination and the term of the struggle on the ground. As such, the shifting the focus from Israel occupation since 1948 and 1967 to the apartheid framework over Palestinian people as a whole, unrelated to the division that the international law proposed and recognize the Palestinian based on their geographical location, which includes like recognition of this colonized historical Palestine as ongoing process. Recognizing apartheid within the context of settler colonialism is tool of not only to accurate description of the situation on the ground, but also examine the root of cause of denial of Palestinian land rights for over a century and create supremacies of Jewish ethnicity through a single legal order of Israeli racial domination over Palestinians. All of these elements are ongoing, all pillar of emphasis on the embracing settler colonial structure of apartheid. So after, just before touching specifically the case law, it's important to understand that according to the Israeli narrative, United Jerusalem is after 67 war, Israel illegally annexed East Jerusalem, and thus it's in 1980 they legislate that Jerusalem and complete and united is the capital of Israel, which is contradictory with the Palestinian narrative that consider that East Jerusalem is the capital for Palestine. And international law consider the decision for Israel to annex East Jerusalem is null and void, and this is why East Jerusalem is occupied territory. And that was that emphasized in several convention and Geneva Convention. So during the last half century of annexation of East Jerusalem, Israel has already confiscated large areas, favor of major Israeli settlements, to build new Israeli settlements, Jewish settlements within East Jerusalem. Israel has confiscated 24,000 dunams, which makes up for 38% of East Jerusalem land, based mainly on 1943 British law, because Israel, inspired by the previous mandate laws, they adopted some of the laws from the previous Ottoman law and then the following the British mandate law, and they use them tool as continuous control over land for the native people. So that law they use, it's authorized the authorities to confiscate lands for the purpose of public interest and like establishing green areas, and they will have all the planning regime, the neutral planning regime, only to confiscate lands for Arab Palestinian in East Jerusalem. So Israel legal system facilitates the nature of expansion of Jewish settlements in Jerusalem by creating new realities within the area, building facts on the ground. The aim is to legitimize the Israeli control of those lands as declaration of sovereignty over East Jerusalem and opposing, limiting and narrowing any future peace talks. That brings me to Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood and Sheikh Jarrah cases, as I will dedicate the remainder of time to just give you a glimpse of contemporary example how land been controlled, how homes been under the threat of eviction for more than 30 years. The example of eviction cases by trying to thus unpack those legal implications of the case of Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood in East Jerusalem. The legal struggle over the housing rights has taken place of nearly more than 5 decades. The picture of the legal struggle of this resident facing the threat of eviction is enormously painful experience to live through. To try to understand the geographical location of the Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood, it's to emphasize the importance of the neighborhood as first point why it's so important to the Jewish settler to control that location. The neighborhood of Sheikh Jarrah is located in northeast of Jerusalem, Old City. It lies with the intersection of the west of Jerusalem. Proximity to the Old City and the holy places within it gives that neighborhood added significance to both Arab and Jewish population of Jerusalem. The neighborhood also has geopolitical significance for both national and international levels, as several diplomatic representation and council and the international organization located in that neighborhood. Secondly, it was inspiring of collective resistance among all Palestinians, regardless their geographical location, where they are raised their voice against this oppression, forced house eviction by Israel from East Jerusalem. More precisely, it led to May 2021 crucial event of Palestinian struggle against Israel's settler colonization, which was manifested yet again a new chapter in history of a Palestinian struggle. What's so-called among Palestinians Habbat al-Quds or Habbat al-Karama. The May uprising of 2021, that was instinctive, ordinary demonstration that occurred in Jerusalem, then spread all over Palestinian towns, big cities within the Green Line, such as Al-Fahim, Yafa, Akka, Ramle, and in all occupied territory, West Bank, Gaza, and extended to everywhere. This was natural outcome for the Israeli settler colonial oppression policies to expel the Palestinians from their borderland zones and increase Jewish settlements within the East Jerusalem location. So in May 2021, hearing was scheduled before the Israeli Supreme Court concerning the eviction of homes for 4 families in Sheikh Jarrah. Potential eviction was ordered by ruling of lower court. The potential eviction soon elevated exceptional worldwide political attention. Therefore, the Israeli Supreme Court shortly postponed the hearing in the efforts to stop the escalation of the demonstration in support of the families in Sheikh Jarrah. There were daily protests and demonstrations against displacement, ethnic cleansing, forced eviction in support of the families of Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood. It's important to also just remind you that the people of Sheikh Jarrah were originally refugees from other parts from historical Palestine in 1948, from Jaffa, West Jerusalem, Haifa, Sarafand, and elsewhere. They were expelled from their homes in 1948 war. UNRWA and Jordanian government secured housing for 28 families, as they were housed in urban residence complex constitute around 18 dunams, referred to it as Karmel Jaouni. Until the occupation of East Jerusalem by Israel in 1967, the Jordanian custodian of enemy property managed the properties. In 1970, properties in East Jerusalem that were previously managed by the Jordanian custodian of enemy property were transferred to the Israeli general custodian. And this was the way how Israel tried to control all the lands and confiscate indirectly the land remaining not confiscated. According to the agreement between UNRWA and Jordanian government of 1954, 28 residential houses in Sheikh Jarrah, they committed to build 28 residential houses, mentioned their families were originally refugees in the other location in historical Palestine. Because of this status, they were granted UNRWA ration cards, but they give that basic support, including the right to receive their stipend and free health in order to obtain rights in their lands. In 1972, there's a Sephardi community claimed the ownership of that land plot. Then they sell their rights to Nahalat Shamon. The Israeli court tried to review tried to evicate based on the settlers' request, tried to evicate and expropriate the land, eventually to displace the 28 families. 2 families so far been evicted by order by the Israeli Supreme Court, which comprise of 53 members. When we are speaking about the families, we are speaking about extended families living in the same location, because the settlements, like how the eviction, if you could imagine the true reality, people could occupy your house, they will come with army and police power, with the settlers as well. They will force the eviction even at midnight, within 3 hours of home that been for generation your home. All the families, all the extended family will be forcibly have to leave. That what we're trying to do through the law, using as much possible within the given law to try to protect those people's right in remaining in their homes. So that raised the problematic issue of, while the eviction is allegedly applied to one family, we are speaking about the cases, 3 cases, the property house extended families, more than hundreds of families and living under this one roof, it's not uncommon because of the housing crisis in East Jerusalem and no availability for lands. The lack of land and the difficulties to obtain building permits, they will force each family, 8 families will include approximately 30 extended family in each house. They will be facing eviction proceeding. It's violation of their basic human rights to evict them from home. They lived for decades, but inherently discriminatory by Israeli legislation. The Israeli legal system affords Jews the right to claim ownership of their homes if they fled in East Jerusalem, while denying any Palestinian the same rights to homes if they fled their homes in East Jerusalem in 1948. Palestinians do not have equal power to recover property they lost in West Jerusalem or elsewhere in historical Palestine, which under 1950 law was declared as abandoned, although the people present absentee, some of them still there, and move under the state control and the custodian, although they can claim symbolic compensation based on the prices of the land in 1948. So due to the appeal over the eviction orders, in August 2022, the Supreme Court tried to propose settlements, and the Palestinian owner rejected that proposal. So we kept why the idea of, like, just to give you perspective of why they wanted to occupy those, evicted those houses specifically, because they are trying to forcibly evict the Palestinian from Sheikh Jarrah, Silwan, all other neighborhoods in East Jerusalem from their home. The language used by Israeli court is paving the way to settlers to take homes in Sheikh Jarrah and justify the eviction and displacement and ethnic cleansing by normalizing the case as real estate dispute, like normal real estate dispute. It is the same language and pattern that Israel court justified the massive land confiscation in Jalil, Naqab, East Jerusalem by using various planning law practices. The emphasis on the fact that occupation is only part of the colonization, fragmenting the Palestinian of Sheikh Jarrah geopolitically within the logic of elimination of Palestinian present in East Jerusalem neighborhood by changing the demographic balance on the ground. The legal system is inseparable from the broader picture. On the contrary, it constructs the legal rules to support and legitimize land confiscation, forced eviction and displacement, and support the policy for the state interests that ready to seize more Palestinian lands under various Israeli pretexts and laws, and establishing more Jewish settlements to change the demographic balance and build facts on the ground, again, to prevent any future peace, all of which have direct implication on the people of East Jerusalem who live under the daily threat, losing their home and their memories and their everything. Furthermore, I'm arguing that one should not ignore understanding the importance of Jerusalem in many other around the world that should question of failure of international law to provide a practical solution and maintain legal order and the preventing expropriation of lands and changing the demographic reality within the state. So the dilemma that brings me also to the additional dilemma that follows when I ask the question whether the Supreme Court of Israel may really engage with pending cases and whether the residents of Sheikh Jarrah may stay in their homes only if we try to protect them through that legal system. In the context of ongoing political conflict over Jerusalem, stopping the eviction often manifested in the opportunities of judges to interfere by using the law to create justice, even if doing wrong counter to the state's policy. If those policies are proven to be discriminatory, is there hope for residents of Sheikh Jarrah despite the political prejudice that have led the contemporary practices of legal eviction, which are the product of the original ethnic division and ethnic cleansing ideology and the demographic balance in East Jerusalem. So the case study that of Sheikh Jarrah, it tries to shed the light on the legal tools that Israel authorities use to maintain this control and power over the housing rights in Sheikh Jarrah. By details and the process that families need to go through in the eviction, this demonstrates how the law has been used to shape the political struggle over Jerusalem in favor to Judaism. as Jewish settlement continued to increase in the Arab neighborhood in East Jerusalem, it has been revealed how law has become a useful tool for authorities, for the settler to maintain power and the spatial control in particular. I'm arguing that the cases of Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood disclose, and other neighborhoods such as Silwan, for instance, disclose how law applies differently depending on how ethnicity and identity of the parties in particular cases. The ownership claims by Arab residents stand in sharp contrast to the claims of Jewish in East Jerusalem. The authorities support the claims of the latter, and the court dismissed cases and outset before even examining the original documentation that we will bring from the archive of the Sharia court in Jordan or from Ankara, from Ottoman archive, that the residents of Sheikh Jarrah provided, which indicates the ownership right. The discrimination inequality indirectly support the Israeli government policies, political agenda, and had long-term implication with respect to the favoring of one ethnic group over the another. Indeed, legal decisions are establishing a reality on the ground that it affects the status quo and the demographic balance in East Jerusalem by excluding Palestinian residents from accessing their homes in East Jerusalem. This in turn will directly affect any future peace resolution or a proposal. That brings me to the last point in this dilemma, that should litigation and protect Palestinians within the Israeli legal system are continuous challenge, honestly. The dilemma of whether indirectly it's contributing to justify this occupation and its apartheid regime, as the Israeli legal courts systematically oppress the marginalized Palestinians, specifically in property laws, while dealing with their any Palestinian property land issue related. Mostly the cases will end with Palestinian dispossession and facilitate the architecture of exclusion. But I believe that this is one path to undertake, as we need to generate the legal agenda. And also people of East Jerusalem don't have the privilege to choose other legal system because they are falling under the jurisdiction of Israel according to the Israeli law. So they will receive the eviction notice in Hebrew, language that they can't read. As lawyer who can read that language, I'm trying to, and scholar as well, while analyzing that case as a legal scholar, I'm trying to develop within the limited tools we having this toolkit to create and generate legal agenda, develop our legal tactics, because every path should be taken instead of alternative to give up. The brutality of the Israeli judiciary emphasized in the fact that it's not recognized any property claim by Palestinians in West Jerusalem. Yet it recognizes the settler property claims in East Jerusalem every day as part of the Judaization, the land agenda. Why this should be different while we're dealing with Jerusalem and thinking about Palestinian legal tactics to go forward in concrete question, not just domestically. The eviction of Palestinian Sheikh Jarrah within Israel legal system, it starts reviewing the long ongoing litigation battle in domestic arena that emphasized will be whether justice can be reached through this colonized settler jurisdiction. In that case, Israel judiciary is no more than instrument that Israel policy of eviction forcibly displaced and erasure of Palestinian presence in East Jerusalem. The Israeli legal system is an integral part of the Zionism colonial state, which identify the Jewish state as systematically oppressed, dispossession, and displaced Palestinian. Why the legal argument alone is insufficient? How does Israel use that land regime and planning structure to facilitate their territory's ambition by increasing Jewish settlements and changing the demographic balance in East Jerusalem? I don't have much hope actually in the system. I will never define that. But this has been said. Let me finish with providing some hope linked to the cases, which the final decision where court suspend Palestinian eviction from their home in Sheikh Jarrah, culminating the decades of long struggle of Palestinian residents to stay at least in their homes for now. The aspiration that this will project some hope for other neighborhoods in East Jerusalem facing the threat of forced eviction, displacement, such as in Silwan, al-Hiran, and all other parts. There's systematic ongoing violation of housing rights due to discrimination, spatial policy led by Zionism ideology. The important to highlight that this eviction of houses, starting point of establishment of Jewish settlement, as mentioned, the plan is to destroy whole neighborhood and build modern Jewish neighborhood. What emerged is that it's the consideration of the neutrality of law and the reasoning behind the political policy to intervene in legal matters. The law is a vital part of shaping power and society and the space control, including division of lands and space. Turning the implication that Sheikh Jarrah as case study, it revealed it's important to draw a broader picture of political involvement. In the case study, how can law shape new reality, threatening the eviction of residents from their homes and their displacement? Sheikh Jarrah critical location and the demographic balance should be considered while we're trying to wait for any future results. You can read more about like the whole land regime and the establishment of land regime, starting from the Ottoman period and the British mandate following for the current legal regime in Israel, trying to have this from a critical legal perspective, critical geography, critical legal geography perspective. You could read that in my book about architecture of exclusion. Thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed and learned something.